Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us a story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
You've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Waiting List podcast. My name is Jacqueline, and I am joined by my co-host, Daniel, with his ever so calming voice to listen to, and Lung Lung, who is currently in Singapore, probably eating up all the satay she could find. Today on the show, we have a very special guest who holds many titles. He is a coffee aficionado, a singer, watch enthusiast, and Hollywood actor, with starring roles in movies such as Final Destination and TV shows such as Mad Men and Gossip Girl. Miles is also a very successful entrepreneur, starting a digital ad agency right out of Harvard. If I remember correctly, Mather House, right?
Close, actually. I was fourth-timer.
Okay,
an otherwise perfect introduction.
Okay, FOHO. I didn't do my homework enough. And most recently, he is also a podcast host with his show, Coffee with the Greats, where he interviews industry titans alongside with his father, which I'm currently on episode 2, and I'm enjoying it. Miles is also a very loyal listener to the Waiting List, so we're very, very happy to have him on the show. Welcome to the show, Miles.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you, Daniel and Lung Lung. This is a great treat, and I believe this may be the first intro you read, so bravo.
I think the key point that I picked up from that intro is that Miles graduated from Harvard, and I think the main thing about Harvard is I need to ask, from what I know from our recent podcast, you need to have completed like pissing on someone's foot. You need to have run around like this place naked. And you're supposed to have sex in a library. Apparently, I heard this is like what you're supposed to do. I just want to know if you're a true graduate and whether you've actually done those. And then actually, you know, if you did, what order you did them in.
Wait, it was pissing on a statue, I think.
Yeah, it was pissing on someone's foot on a statue. Yeah.
What? Okay. All right.
Miles, you have to blame me for it. They asked me what's something that people don't know about Harvard. So I basically told him primal scream, hook up in Widener, and then pee on the John Harvard statue.
You know, I don't know if the theme of those three musts has really changed since the 1600s, to be honest. I think it's always been vaguely sexually depraved. There's some of those things that I've done and some that I've yet to do. But I think as a Harvard graduate, you do have lifetime tenure to complete all three, perhaps. So
okay.
We'll see.
Reunions?
But I guess so. But I'm impressed, Jacqueline. That's a real feat. Bravo to you.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I didn't. You're just messing with me. Okay. Let's go back to course. I guess we'll start off with the first question. Obviously, with the intro, our audience who aren't familiar with who you are and what you've accomplished so far in life now know that you've had a very colorful life experience. So I guess my first question is, are you like the type of guy, the jack of all trades type of guy, or is it because looking back, you found out that, oh, it took you a little bit longer to find out what you really want to do?
It's a great question. I'll first say, to be honest, I'm 37 years old. So here's hoping I'm not even at the halfway mark of my life. But all that being said, I realize it's a lot. And a lot of people, you know, will say to me, what is it, man? I can't quite peg you. I know you're sincerely interested in the things you do, but sure seems like a whole bunch of bowling balls you're juggling in the air. I think a lot of my life story is a product of traveling and kind of the circumstances I grew up in. Just kind of for context, I was born in Dallas, Texas. And when I started high school, in ninth grade, we moved to Washington, D.C. But before that, I had traveled around a lot. Every summer, my father was involved in international finance. When I was really young, when I was 5 years old, I lived in Japan for a year. every summer we traveled internationally, and music was also a big part of my life. So I sang in a choir, but this choir was quite professional. And so by the time I was 10 years old, had performed in cathedrals in Europe, the great cathedrals, Westminster Abbey and Notre Dame. And so, performing as traveling and having that be a separate thing. And then high school was kind of an international experience. I went to high school in Washington, D.C., but a lot of my friends' parents were also in government, either the U.S. government or foreign diplomats' children. And, like you, I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. I feel like they made a mistake in the admissions process, and I kind of lucked into Harvard, which to me was kind of like Hogwarts. I mean, it was this magic place. And I started a few of these groups that kind of changed my life. One of them was singing in this, it sounds ridiculously nerdy, but college a cappella group in college. And this was before the show Glee, and every summer this group went on this world tour, and I got to really perform all over the world, such that by the time, I was approaching my 30s, I had been to over 50 countries. I had friends in a lot of those places. And I'd always viewed my career as being kind of creatively entrepreneurial. Mm-hmm. And so when I finished school, I graduated in 2006. And this was around the time, all of you can kind of understand this timing, particularly Dan, you and I are kind of the same vintage, but 2006-ish was an interesting time. All of the ambitious, I think, American students traditionally would go into either finance or consulting. Mm-hmm. And it had just started this move for America into Silicon Valley. A classmate of mine was Mark Zuckerberg. He had left sophomore year, but there was Silicon Valley, initially arms crossed on the cover of magazine, these young people with the word founder written below it. Mm-hmm. That was very appealing. Nobody was moving to Los Angeles. And I was always kind of making these videos, and I thought, Facebook had just started. YouTube had just been bought by Google. Brands were kind of taking 30-second television spots and just slapping it on the internet at the time. And I was fluent in this new language of social media, whatever that was. By the way, when I graduated school, I was 22, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of hustling and trying to generate stuff. And so I started a little digital ad agency, as you say, which sounds really handsome, retrospectively. I was just trying to get paid to make videos that I could put on the internet. Mm-hmm. And somehow I pulled it off and started making music videos. Early days of YouTube, still to this day, but one of the highest engagement on early digital video was music, kind of ironically, mm-hmm. but it was a free way to stream music, right? And so I started shooting music videos. They started getting millions of views back when that was a big deal. And I got interest from record labels to sign with record labels. And I was like, I don't want to do that, because with my super cool college a cappella group, I know what world touring is like. But the business was touring. That's how you monetized it. And I was like, I don't want to tour. I kind of want to make these videos and see what happens. And so I started pitching brands on, I will make your music videos, and I'll get you millions of eyeballs if you let me drive your Range Rover, or let me wear your K-Swiss shoes. Or, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I was like, holy smokes, I'm charging these brands. Well, what I love about your podcast, and I'll just take a second quickly before I wrap up this too long answer. I so appreciate your podcast, which I've listened to every episode, because it's such sincere conversation, and you're very quick to call BS on people. And I also like that you really zero in on the price of things, even the emotional price. But at the time, right? So it's like 2008, 2009, and big record labels weren't even paying for big music videos anymore. Like, it didn't make sense for Gwen Stefani's music video to cost more than $25,000, because we had moved beyond kind of MTV, this was reality television and whatnot. And so like, they couldn't recoup that investment. Streaming had not, the record industry was a big problem, but I was getting, a brand to pay me $100,000 to shoot a video that cost me $5,000 to make. And I'm like 24, like having a blast, just being like, so do I just pocket the rest of this? Is this like what I do? And it was really exciting and dynamic. And from that, I started getting asked to audition in shows, and then started getting cast in movies and TV shows, and you know, had a fun run doing that kind of all through my 20s. And in my, you know, as I approached my 30s, I met the woman who's now my wife, and you know, my priorities began to kind of recalibrate, and it led me down this road of this coffee business and a whole bunch of other ventures. But anyways, I'll shut up for a moment.
Yeah, I got a question straight off, like, which is, you mentioned that a lot of people were migrating to finance and also Silicon Valley maybe, and nobody was going to LA. Why did you not go and follow the herd? What made you go, I'm going to go to LA, and have the courage to do so? Because it seems like when I speak to you, we've spoken to you about 3 hours before this, you seem quite very clear in your conviction. It doesn't seem like you hesitate or procrastinate, and you kept on moving. So I would like to know, what was the mental process, if there was one, of I don't want to do that? Was it the fact that everybody was doing that and you just thought, I don't want to do that because everybody else is doing that? Or did you actually think, I actually want to go to LA because I want to, that's where all the producing is and that's the right environment?
It's a great question. As I'm listening to you ask that, I'll tell you a kind of a quote that has always stuck with me. In a hero of mine, a guy who was really kind of one of the last American true moguls. His name was Steve Ross, and his crowning achievement was he created Time Warner. He joined Warner Brothers in time, but he started really with a funeral home. One of the great Americans. The only equivalent today is kind of Rupert Murdoch. And for a while in an earlier life, I dated his daughter. And one of the most famous things privately that he said on his deathbed was, he said, there are three kinds of people in life. There are people who wake up every day and they work extremely hard, good, hard, honest work. And they go to bed and they wake up the next day and they continue to work hard. And all their life is hard work, but that's it, with little color. The second person wakes up and all day they dream, big, beautiful dreams, ambitious dreams, but that's it. And that's what their life amounts to, intangible dreams. He said, and then there's a third category of people who wake up and they dream, ambitiously dream large for just a few hours. And then they spend the rest of the day working hard to achieve it. And he said, go into that category because that's where there's the least amount of competition. And it's that final part that's always driven me of like, yeah, I grew up with this kind of innate talent. I've always known it since I was really young, of mimicking. I can just mimic people's behavior, the way they sound. I think it's because I grew up traveling so much that I never really had a center of gravity, and I so badly wanted to assimilate. And, you know, it's a little bit of a magic trick, just being able to mimic. And so as I've gone through these various institutions, I was lucky enough to get into Harvard in the first place, but then I could kind of speak the language of like Silicon Valley. By the way, Silicon Valley kids-ish, they were total nerds. I mean, it was really kind of like math quant type minds, right? Engineers. And then the finance guys and girls, I just didn't have that kind of mind. I do fine in mathematics, but I was an English literature major because I knew the majority of my education would come outside the classroom, but I knew it was the only discipline where charm was the difference between a full letter grade. That I could just be charming and write, you know, the fact in a science class that there was like a right and a wrong answer, I'd be like, no, let's look at this a different way. What if maybe this was actually the answer? Like that doesn't work in any equation. Mm-hmm. But so I don't know. I was like, Silicon Valley, that's great. I will likely have friends there one day. There's less competition where no one else is going. And then I can kind of bring these other sensibilities to LA. I mean, that's probably a rationalized answer 15 years after the fact. The truth is, I have no idea, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay. In that answer, you made this very quick assumption, which is I knew most of my education would come from outside the classroom. I think we have a lot of young listeners listening to this podcast, right? That aren't quite as vintage as you.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah. Vintage is such a great word. Masks a lot. How did you know that? And when did you know that? And how did you know it was right for you? It might not be right for everybody, but at least for you. Because I think a lot of people, especially in Chinese culture, right, they follow very set frameworks of studying, mostly designed by their parents.
Yeah.
And they don't really entertain this kind of thing that you just said. So, but you just assumed it very quickly.
Well, I will admit I had a big step up in that I had two older siblings who also were very high achieving and also went to Harvard and also excelled there. And I had a big extended family of kind of, just similar ambitions. And so as the third of four children in my family, there was no tolerance for not doing your best. But yeah, I just knew that, there's a whole, I don't know, when you hang out with kind of your older brother's friends and naturally with your siblings, you kind of think, yeah, sure. Like my siblings are okay, but they're kind of nerdy and kind of uncool. I mean, by the time the third one comes around, it's like, look, I just want to kind of get into trouble and play at the margins. And so I'd always done that in high school. And I was also someone too, who got my social capital, for lack of a better phrase. Look, I was a decent athlete. I've always played on the cool sports teams my whole life, but that wasn't my thing. That didn't identify me. I got most of my social capital from shooting videos with my camcorder in high school and casting my friends in little sketches and like casting my teachers, and that being able to, be with the nerdy musician kids, but also be like a quarterback on the football team was secretly like, I loved being multi-fluent at all the cafeteria tables, if that made sense. So, yeah, but that said, I have to say, Jacqueline, because I just listened to your interview and you, I think, approached your undergraduate curriculum in a totally smart, usual, disciplined, like, alpha way, which is, okay, I'm going to get this done because by the time it's senior year, like not only will I have excelled in everything, it's all electives, like it's going to be an absolute blast, etc. And for me, it was totally different from the start. I felt, I know I will probably be an English or history major. So I want to take as many electives as I can freshman year, because I might stumble into, all the schools that we all went to. You had to have 4 years of advanced mathematics, 4 years of life sciences, just to qualify to even apply. But I had never taken like a social anthropological course. I really hadn't taken much psychology. And so, I took these random and met these professors as a freshman, the only freshman in these senior classes. And that totally changed the course of my undergraduate experience. So for young people, don't be foolish, but, going to a place like Harvard and there are many, many institutions like that all over the world, I view it as it's a Disneyland for the mind. So ride all the rides, at least ride all the rides once. And then the ones that you really like, just get back in line and like do it again. But I don't think that's a very Chinese way of thinking, which is probably, it means it's not the smart way of thinking, because I'm just like, hey, lucky American guy. Like, I realize it sounds ridiculous.
I don't think so. So for me, I was just talking about this with my friend Wendy yesterday when we were on a walk. We were thinking back to college days. So she has already graduated. I'm still on a gap semester. And she was like, Jacqueline, I don't know about you, but whenever I think back to college, it's like bittersweet, but it's more bitter than sweet, because I still don't know what I want to do. And I feel like you figured it out. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I went forward and I told her about basically how I spent my freshman year. Miles, you mentioned like the Chinese parenting or like the Chinese way. I come from, I'm an only child, so I have no idea what it feels like to have a sibling. Growing up, I had all four eyes on me from my parents. And my mom particularly, she is like my role model. I don't think I would be as good of a mother as she was to me. She is to me. So during my freshman year, she was so protective and worried about my transition from high school to college. So much so that she went into Boston around Kendall Square, like MIT area, and rented an apartment for 6 months. And she was like, Jacqueline, I'm here for you, but like don't feel pressure to come back. I'm just here for you. You can come back and study for exams. And I was like, okay, sure. I felt I had this safety net and I could do whatever the hell I wanted. So similar to what you did, I took almost all electives the first semester of college. I took a VES course, which is photography, where I was the only freshman there. And then I took a course, a seminar in archaeology. And then I took 2 like gen ed classes. But really, I had the most fun in the VS and archaeology, where I met the professors and the juniors and seniors. So much so that I spent the following summer in Israel and Tibet digging up like graves. That was how I spent my freshman summer. And I remember my mom, when I finished freshman year, she was like, "So what did you learn?" And I told her about the classes, and she was like, "Wait, so you didn't take any of the like so-called important classes?" And I'm like, not yet. Like, I still have 1 more year until I figure out what major I want to major in. And she was like, okay, maybe you should feel less free now, and maybe you should follow what most other people are doing. Which is why starting sophomore year, I started taking a lot more gen ed classes. And then once you declare your major, you obviously have to follow a track. But I am so lucky, and I'm so glad that I kind of went off track a little bit the first semester of freshman year. I didn't get to meet as many freshmen when I was a freshman because of the classes I took, but I met them regardless in sophomore year. And now the things that I have learned from senior classmates, I mean, that stuck with me a little bit more than just going to parties and enjoying your freshman year. So I think definitely you should definitely cut yourself like a lot more credit, and you didn't follow the generic way, and you turned out like, look how you turned out. So yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
I gotta say, like, Jacqueline, like, you're a Chinese person that has really adopted Western philosophy. Like, the way you behave, the way you think, right, is very Westernized. And therefore, we've spoken about this, when you come back to China, you do feel like you're not 100% like more. I mean, mixed culture kids generally have that anyway, but you will feel it more. And I think with Miles is that, you know, in China you had single child policy. So, but Miles has 2 elder brothers, right? Which
older brother, older sister. Yeah.
Okay, elder siblings, and they were examples for him. Plus, you know, America has, you know, we're looking at 2nd, 3rd generation wealth here. You know, where maybe wealth is more institutionalized in the West, and there's more time to where successful messages have been passed through more generations, and therefore they kind of know the source. But
and the ramifications of that are fascinating. I mean, I always remember talking to some Chinese friends, Hong Kong and Chinese, but especially Chinese friends at uni. And, you know, they were telling me things like I was joking about my mother's car when I was young. She drove a Buick, which in America in this day and age, you know, there's nothing fancy about it. And the Chinese students were saying, well, I mean, Mao drove a Buick. Like, Buicks are like extremely well regarded to an older generation of Chinese. And I was like, are you serious? He's like, no, they're better than Mercedes. And I was like, how interesting. Like, there's no right and wrong, but the, you know, quote unquote new money. And of course, Americans have nothing on the UK as far as all of that and all these different, but one other point, just as I listen to both of you speak, is my wife is an only child, and she, her mother and father were a bit unusually old when they had her. And one of the things that I know is not difficult between my wife and I, but I think I attribute it to having siblings, is she speaks in a much slower way. And, when I was at the dinner table with my siblings, you had to get it. If I know my whole life what it feels like to be told, hey, shut up, my whole life. And so I have to be quick, kind of getting in my point and earning my place when I've got 3 other siblings just to compete for my parents' attention. And I think that kind of comes a little bit too from being an only child. And, she's always been the center of their universe for all the right reasons. But it's a totally different cadence. I can't imagine a life without siblings. And I know that if I were an only child, I think I would have a really, really wonderful, who knows, a wonderful life.
I think
I want to say something.
Yeah.
Like, I'm an only child, but I think it 100% comes down to parenting, right? Because Jacqueline's super westernized, and then even though I find that I'm slightly westernized, I still have a lot of the Chinese traditional values where I think, okay, my happiness doesn't matter. I gotta study this. I gotta do that. But I tell you, the most confusing thing about Chinese parenting is that, so we have the privilege of being an only child. So then your parents dote on you. They let you do whatever you want. And then they think they're not like helicopter parents, right? So they'll be like, okay, I'm just here if you need me. So same with me. It's like, do whatever you want. Just know that you can always come home. We will never kick you out of the house. Even if you become pregnant, come to us, that kind of thing, right? So you have a really strong support system. But then as a kid, you're just screaming out like, hey, please parent me. Give me a direction, even if your direction to me was, listen, this is uncomfortable, but you got to follow through with it. You got to finish it. Right. That's better than zero parenting for me. Because
but I also,
Long,
I mean, I've heard you on an early podcast, as you and Dan were just catching up, and you're like, well, I spoke to my mom today, and you're like, and I do that every single day, no matter what, like every day for like, you are an extraordinarily diligent child. Like, I feel like I'll talk to my mom maybe once every 2 weeks. And let me tell you, I'm a great American son. Like, it's like, I think that's extraordinarily cool of your parents. But then at the same time, you also strike me, just having listened to you, as like, you really walk this line kind of just like international cosmopolitan woman. I mean, you're professional, you live life on your own terms. You do kind of have, it's not just like American, or I believe you're part Malaysian. Like you just strike me as like a modern global woman. And kind of that I see even Harvard, like when I went to Harvard, my sister went and female cousins went, and like socially, they were totally different level playing fields. Like guys had these clubs and fraternities, and like girls just straight up didn't. The school had been around since 1636, but it only was coeducational in the 1960s. Like and as a brother of my sister's, like, I was like, this is ridiculous. But anyways, who am I to say on the levels of, single? I feel like my mom was a tiger mom. I mean, I feel like my mom was the most like vicious. She was so ambitious for her children. She just kind of split it 4 ways.
I think one of the points that I was talking to Jacqueline this week about, or I don't know when I was talking to her about it, was for most, probably our parents, at least for my parents, when they were setting out, embarking on their career, they didn't have a choice. They had no choice. So it was very clear that even if they didn't like it, they got to do it. But obviously, when now it comes to our generation, we have a choice, right? But at the same time, we don't have a choice of the fact that we have a choice. Do you know what I mean? We can't choose the I don't have a no choice route, right? Which means like when you don't have any choices, you really know very clearly what you want, what you need to do.
Yeah.
But when you have a choice, you can't just say, I'm going to do this very quickly, because you have to have an essence of thought to make a decision on, right, I've got all these choices. Which one do I do? And it's very easy to go down like, what you said, like dreaming big, decision paralysis, not actually doing anything. Because you haven't been trained to have that courage to do it. And your parents are like, I don't get you. Just do it, to do this. And you're like, yeah, well, it's easy for you because you didn't have a choice. And then your parents are like, back in our day, we had no choices, we had to do it. Yeah, I know, but we're not in your day. Yeah. And they say it but then in their mind, they think, yeah, you're spoiled. Right. So
But then at the
think,
same time, because I know you have two children as well,
Yeah.
Daniel, it's like you also realize now as a parent, when we were young, we thought, of course, our parents knew everything. It's like, we're just making it up as we go along too.
yeah.
I don't know.
But I think both of you touch on something that I again bring to my children when I think about parenting is you guys explored a lot more to find out your decision-making process of what shall I do, and you didn't regard anything as wasted time or non-valuable because you put a high value on experience. That's something which I would also agree with. When my parents, I wouldn't say I was pigeonholed, but they also wanted to be a total high flyer. My parents were very, very like tigerish. And back in their day, if you were in medicine, you were basically a bank. You were printing money. But come to my generation, it's not like that anymore. It's very well regarded. Yeah, you make good money, but you're not a bank. And I think as parents make it up, as you said, make it up as they go. They also realized, and this is what I'm so grateful for. Like, they had an open mind, even at their older, like when they were older, to realize, you know what, we've actually not got this right, and we need to support our son in this and this, right? Irrespective of how long we've been parenting him this way. So medicine, you spend 15 years doing it. At age 15, you decide that you're going to spend the next potentially 40, 50 years doing this. You don't really have enough experience to make that decision. You've not even come out in society. And for them to really not give me hassle about not doing it, I couldn't ask for anything more from Chinese parents, because I got it easy compared to, I'm sure, a lot of other people if they wanted to. I just don't think, irrespective of whether it's medicine, other high-flying careers, difficult to come out of, I think.
And it is a great privilege because that much of that is incumbent on your parents reaching success by the time you were there. And so for my father, his father was abandoned on a doorstep, was homeless. My dad grew up in pretty tough circumstances, was very much kind of quote unquote self-made. And on my mom's side, comes from a very old family in Texas. And she also, was cool to encourage me to be very creative. And if you quit something, only quit something when you've done it long enough to know what it is you're giving up. Because there's kind of a two-sided street. It's like, we encourage you to do whatever you want, but if you want to do Taekwondo, that's totally fine. And we will set it up so that you really can explore this, but you will do it every day for 6 years, whether you like it or not. So if you want to do this, let's do it, but you will not quit. So it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
It resonates with the other guy we interviewed, Nicholas Harris, who does the HIS straps, right? Where, again, generational wealth, the key message was, you don't quit. Like, it wasn't to try stuff. It wasn't, it was, you finish what you start, right? And then I remember Alex came back with a thing, which is something that Li Jiacheng said. So Li Jiacheng is one of the big tycoons in Hong Kong. Well, probably the biggest tycoon. And
now that Jimmy Lie's out,
he was saying that you
not
should
to make reference of him. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just have to say it's an interesting story in America, and he's a pretty extraordinary figure. I'll just leave it at that. But he really is an extraordinary. He's really putting his mouth where his actions are, and from an outside observer, it's impressive. Talk is cheap.
Yeah.
He's doing it.
True.
But I cut you off.
No, I was just saying that, Li Jiancheng said that, you should know when the end is there, like when to quit, right? And I think if you listen to that phrase, you can focus the energy on quit. Actually, it's actually on know. When do you know to quit? Not on when you should know when to quit, right? It's a very different way you process that sentence, the way you read it. So it could almost mean the same thing as being persistent, right? But it's very very, very interesting. You know, I like you as
I'll
student of
just say
life.
that is kind of the mantra that my parents would say, which is very much kind of uh, an American, almost like the children that go to liberal arts educations. It was, of course, it comes originally from Shakespeare, but to thine own self be true. And you know, now you're getting philosophical, because how does one know themselves? And it's kind of the completion of life. And, you know, Oscar Wilde used to say, you must be yourself because everybody else is already taken. Yeah. And, you know, I think for all of us, and I think for many people listening who are equipped, one thing I found about watch people is they're all, on the whole, very intelligent people. And so, you know, you have a whole bunch of people with overactive minds that know they have these talents. They know they've got this toolkit of skills. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, how do it's much easier to hear what other people want you to be, and then to convince yourself that that is your own story. Like, I'm always amazed that we think of our brains as truth-seeking organs. It's like, okay, I get the spiel. I'm an intelligent person. I'll figure it out. Give me the facts. I'll figure it out. But the truth is that I found is like our brains are just very loyal press secretaries that at the end of the day are just rationalizing a narrative, being like, well, today Miles Fisher did this because this really made sense. And that did this. And like, a little white lie here. And this, you know, we constantly rationalize. And it's like, well, how do I really know who I am? Because there's so much distraction now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
I'm currently reading this book called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And that whole book, in a nutshell, is just saying that there's no way you can train yourself, even the best CIA agents and everything. You just, because you try and rationalize everything. So you're like, okay, she's reacting this way. Her eyes are getting bigger because of this and that, whatever. Like, you cannot predict this. People lie and you just can't pick it up. There's no way you can pick it up. Yeah. So just don't try and sometimes like don't rationalize things and just let it be, you know?
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard, like easier said than done.
Of course. Yeah.
And particularly when we have, you know, these machines every moment in the palms of our screens that are, whether we like it or not, forcing us to, they're just comparison devices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I know we've all kind of spoken about this before, and not to get off topic, but, you know, comparison can be the thief of happiness. And we don't realize we're doing it. We don't know we're doing it, but we're taking people's exterior worlds and we're putting it on even playing field with our interior worlds. And it's like, this is not how the real world works.
Well, I think it's a very interesting topic to explore. I mean, we can explore it in here. I mean, you obviously run a digital ad agency doing a lot of content, which if you are the receiving end, you might say is not high nutritional content. I know that you get your nutritional content from the podcast and from reading, which we've spoken about, and yet you produce this content. How do you balance that in your mind? And then also, what is the future? Like, how do you see children? What is the long-term effect of this social media use on the next generation?
Gosh, I can only give you a couple of guesses, but let me answer the first part. To be clear, my business is a coffee roasting business. My partner, Remington Hotchkiss, my co-founder, and I started this business about 4 years ago, and I love coffee. And the idea was, you know, obviously direct to consumer has been making moves for a long time. Humans are loyal to convenience. You know, coffee all over the world has really had an extraordinary moment over the last 10, 15 years. It's mostly been in physical bricks and mortar coffee shops. And the biggest story in the world right now is, of course, well, after Luckin Coffee going down, you know, China's expanding 4,000 Starbucks into the mainland per year. I mean, those numbers are big. All over the world, we've had the Starbucks effect forever. But it's all your local coffee shop, and that is great. I think everybody loves a good coffee shop, but the market, certainly here in America, is the home kitchen. Mm-hmm. And, you know, grocery stores. I mean, now, even during the pandemic, it seems so kind of obvious, but The truth is, I always felt the brands of the last 100 years were all built on shelves, and the brands of tomorrow all are built, I say, in the phone, on the phone screen. That's the shelf. And going back to my initial story when I was young and kind of very early on social media, and also being an English major, all the movements in my life, I think, have been running towards storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And even my interest in watches, which we'll get to later on, but narrative, storytelling, inspiring the imagination. And so I think the phone is just extraordinary, you know, and we're at this just really crazy point where and there's no reverse button. There's no going back. I mean, I remember a world pre-internet. Barely I remember it. I was born in 1983. I remember having a lot of social interactions pre the smartphone. But the truth is, there's like two things that happened, right? It was the internet, the World Wide Web, information superhighway. This will do everything for government, democracy, for self-empowerment. And then there was the personal computer, right? From big desktops to laptops. And two of those things were huge revolutions. But the truth is, it actually wasn't until the crazy wormhole happened where the internet and the computer was installed on your human body via the smartphone. And that's now the wormhole where, unclear what the future brings, but you have this entire new paradigm and landscape where, let's just pause for a second. It's the holidays, right? I'm thinking about getting presents for people. Frankly, thinking about myself, and it's mostly about the kids. When I was young and I got one nice Christmas present a year, you know, you get tiny little things, but like you get one nice present that you ask for. So if I think through when I was young in grade school, what those things were, it's like, well, maybe one year it was a boombox, so a music player. One year it was, you know, maybe a TV, maybe a video game player, maybe like a really nice camera. Like all of these things that I saved up 10 years for, we all just totally take them for granted in our phone device. Mm-hmm. They're all compressed in there. But the real genius of it is, you know, the person who's like, yeah, the outward facing camera, that's great, but let's also put another camera facing the person. And this subliminal just branding that young people now are broadcasting to the world, that, you know, you look at, if you ever want to be amazed at just the talents that tech has in us, I dare you to look at an 18-month-old child hold an iPad. It's one of the most extraordinary things. They just, they intuitively know, their eyes light up, they start, and then, you know, the next time they see a paper menu at a restaurant, they start touching the paper and being like, why doesn't this screen? Why doesn't it? It's extraordinary. But I think there's such cool stuff going on in the iPhone as a consumer, and what you're saying, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I've been a student of cinema, which was really a 20th century art form, and then serialized versions of that through television. When you really zoom out to 30,000 feet, we're just kind of like what you said earlier, Dan, you just keep going. And going back to time, you know, I've always felt time is one of the only finite resources in life. It's a hokey thing to say, but it's true. There's only 24 hours in a day. And we have always lived in a time merchant economy. And attention is extraordinarily valuable. The most valuable companies in the world trade off your attention. And so those are now new metrics. And, you know, even the idea of branding. I mean, I was just reviewing kind of the life of Hans Wilsdorf, founder of Rolex, who is a real inspiration, his early days. But when I think about the time, so Rolex was founded, I think, 1908. You know, brands didn't even exist because they just started the idea of like advertising agencies. Really around that time could pitch you and be like, I can get you in magazines. There were no brand stores. It was only jewelry stores. All around the world, you went to your jeweler. Like the consumer didn't even care about who made the thing because the jeweler's name was on every dial. Around the world, every jeweler had the dial. And so the idea of like even branding yourself is kind of a new thing, big picture. So I don't know. I think it all accelerates. And I think the emerging generation will continue to feel entitled to information. And that's a scary thing. But already we're in like a post-factual world. I mean, I've always wondered with you guys, like, can everybody get this podcast in China? If I sent you a YouTube link, like, can everybody open that? Like, I
No.
don't even know what's accessible.
No Instagram. No. Spotify is very dodgy. Apple Podcasts, yeah, I think you can, but it'll be probably quite heavily censored. But there's other like podcast platforms and stuff. It's just that China has its own staple companies which do what the American companies do, but
Right.
they're not 100% like copies, because they're still like localized to the market, but they do have certain features. And now certainly, you know, I think to some extent American companies also look at Chinese companies and think, what can we actually take from those platforms and put onto ours, because they're not like to like. But, you know, talking about having that forward facing camera, you know, a lot of social media is about getting attention, right? To some extent, you could say that's like fame. And I remember in our last interview, you said you wouldn't want to wish that on your worst enemy. What is it that you've observed about fame on your friends or your personally experienced that is so undesirable?
Well, I think honestly, it's the day and age of the camera. Insofar as, and I was when I was saying that to you, I meant, you know, the moment. Look, there are advantages to being famous. I am not someone who's really in the public eye, etc. I was saying I've had friends I've worked with. You know, I've been in scenes with DiCaprio and, you know, real deal movie stars. And I'm just saying, like, I've also been around you know, presidents of the United States and people with like real power. And, you know, it was kind of nicer to just like ask someone for their autograph. Like, it's not that intrusive, like maybe a pen or whatnot. Mm. Being around someone who, again, the word entitled, like everybody just right up in your business being like, hey, pose for a photo with me. And I'm just going to throw it here in the middle. You know, there's no privacy. And again, decorum, occasion, privacy kind of all melts away. And everything is amplified. So, and of course, you know, it's kind of, once it's in the press, you're kind of guilty until proven innocent. But then some people kind of like that. I don't know. I also think it's kind of nice to be discreet. Listen, you're talking to the kind of guy who would prefer to listen to a 2.5 hour watch podcast than, like, you know, be in some hip reality show. But yeah, right now it's a brutal time because everybody feels entitled to know everything about you. And, you know, life is not two-dimensional.
Yeah. I thought you said something that was, I didn't think of it that way, was when you were saying that you were reading about Hans Wildorf and how brands really didn't start branding themselves until the early like 1900s. And now we all brand ourselves, like as individuals, we brand ourselves through our front facing cameras. And you look at that in teenagers. I remember I got my first iPhone when I was 16, my first phone when I was 16. I was late to the game. And I remember I had to like win a swim meet in order for my mom to like agree to, no, I was 14, 16 was a little too late, to like sign me up with a plan. And when I was in high school, it was, I went to a school where it was kindergarten, elementary school, junior high, and high school, right? So K to 12. And I saw this like grade 3 student with an iPhone. And I was just like, what is happening? Are kids nowadays really so in touch with technology? I genuinely believe that my generation, I still remember going outside after school and just playing outside. Now you look at kids, they all have iPhones, they all have iPads, not enough time spent outside anymore. But going back to what you said about being in the public eye, you know how there's a saying called there's no such thing as bad publicity? Like in terms of actors or celebrities. And I think that is what kids are, how social media is feeding them that information, that message. Is like, if people are talking about you, no matter what is it that you've done something right because you are getting other people's attention. And exactly what we talked about. Brands, like social media platforms, they sell your attention to agencies, market agencies. And I remember like I took a class last semester on social media, and like surveillance capitalism. And I was blown away by the information that was presented. And frankly, people just don't know, or they don't know, and they know and they don't care enough.
Right. And I'm totally agree with you. Now, let me ask you an honest question. What did you do 1 week after you finished that class? Did you change any of your behavior? Did you put on some new apps on your phone? Did you stop listening to certain things?
I mean, no.
Yeah. So again, I find this to be a trend that's always gone back. It's new and it's weird because, again, I was in preparing for this interview, I was just reading up on watch history, and trains. When trains were brought into the developed world, that changed everything. I mean, people had not gone outside. So, of course, clocks rather, were extraordinarily critical for coordination of activity between a range of areas. And it was like, well, who are these outsiders, and what's going on in international commerce and languages and like religion, all of these things. But what's weird now is how subconscious it scratches our, lizard brains, to be honest. I think the reality is that mankind has not had a software upgrade in 50,000 years. We're still running the same hardware in our brains from 50,000 years ago. But artificial intelligence, which is just really fast, self-improving algorithms in real time, is realizing that we are triggered by emotion and not by facts. And that listen to young people. I don't know if it's the same in Chinese, but young people in America start every other sentence with, I feel like, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, but I kind of feel, I don't know, you know what I feel like? And it's like, you're taught from a young age, like, you know what? No one can negate your truth. Find your truth. What are your feelings? And it's like, feelings are not facts. Numbers matter, science matter. I mean, this whole kind of alternate reality, that's where it gets really scary. And, we'll see where it goes. But right now it is a major, major, major shift. But it's exciting for companies like myself that are selling a time-tested commodity, right? Coffee. And we're using storytelling, be it a podcast. I have a long-form podcast where I interview people over coffee. Simple as it sounds, Coffee with the Greats. It just happens that these are really great men and women we're interviewing. And then I do 10-second videos on Instagram, but then we use an email list. Like I respond to, and you learn a lot. Initially, first generation of Instagram was, how do I take better photos? And the hack on the platform was, we create filters that make you look like you're a good photographer, because back then it was like iPhone generation 4.
Yeah.
The lenses were kind of crappy and most people didn't know anything about lighting. And so it made you look like you took a better selfie of yourself. And now it's evolved to the point where it's actually really effective communicating and starting a dialogue with people that can then be taken offline. And so things kind of change. People thought television was just going to ruin the movies. Well, they're totally different things. And I think, TikTok, you're right. I think most American companies are very envious of the algorithmic intellectual property of the Chinese. But like TikTok, right? Like that algorithm like blows the pants right now off of like Facebook. And all of this is like, well, what does this even mean? What does this even mean? A lot of times, like my wife constantly will call me out on stuff and she'll be like, so what if like this photo gets a bunch of likes? And I'm like, that's great. She's like, what if it doesn't? I was like, I don't know. I'll take it down. I'll archive it. She's like, so the good ones are like the good ones. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, but what does that mean? Does that just mean more people like you? Like, what does that do for you? Like, what is that? She's very much like, why do you care about anybody's approval? And I was like, well, but this enables me to talk about this thing. So I don't know. Sometimes what I know is from all kind of artists that I've talked to, be it, hey, actor guys, or like legitimate watchmakers or dancers or people that work with ceramics and pottery, it really does. They're good ones. It just comes from a desire to express yourself. Here's my take on it. And I've always been in also to like men's fashion and men's tailoring. And that's what, and there was a point, I'll tell a story. I actually haven't thought about this in a long time. Acting's a horrible, lousy business. Let me just say that to begin. It's a really crummy business. It's not a business. It's, there's no hierarchy to like, well, if I do this well and do this well and do this well, eventually I'll land up in the corner office. Throw that out the window, Mac. You audition, and auditioning's it's like what Churchill said about democracy. It's the worst form of government except for every other kind invented. And it's like this necessary evil, by the way, as I say that too, an entirely very powerful, effective, emerging communist party into the 21st century, which I realize. I must say, I'm quite envious of the Chinese state over the next 100 years, and I'll leave it at that. Where was I? Where was I? I just paused for a quick second.
Churchill.
Acting, Churchill.
Oh, acting, auditioning. I auditioned I've gone through thousands of auditions.
Yeah.
Truly. And most of the time it has nothing to do with me. But there's something that clicked kind of like 7 years in. And after that, I started booking a lot of jobs. And it was basically this realization that took after like a lot of pain and like 7 years of not getting parts, which was essentially like, oh, I'm going to stop trying to solve for what I think they want to see. See, the way it works is you get the scene that you're going to do, and it's a couple of scenes. And, if you have a good agent, you've read the script beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking, in my case, it's like, we're looking for a 28-year-old, young, good guy with the heart of gold who's in like 5 scenes in this. And I think, okay, I've read this. They're probably going to cast 150 guys. Here's what I think they need to see to cast me. And I would try to solve for what I imagined they were looking for. And then 7 years in, I think mostly just purely out of resentment, I was like, fuck it. I'm just going to do my take. And this is the coolest version of this character I'm going to play. Because at the very bottom, if for any reason they like that, nobody else who auditions for this part is going to offer that. Nobody. So here's my take. And when I started doing that, I just started booking roles. And I don't know what can be gleaned from that other than like probably stop trying to please other people. But when it really comes to artistry and then the satisfaction of doing something, it's really got to be your version of it, which again, going back to Daniel, what we were talking about 30 minutes ago, like to your own self be true. Sure. How do you figure that out? How do you even figure out your take? It's a really naked, vulnerable thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's probably must have been quite a hard, difficult discussion with yourself, because you've previously described yourself as a mimic, which is basically the opposite of being yourself, and also a people pleaser, which is again not being yourself.
Sure.
So to actually like realize that, which is something that you've probably been doing all your life, and think, oh fuck it, you must have got to a brick wall and thought, fuck this, really. And it would have been a difficult talk, but we have to move on, because we could just be philosophizing,
Yeah.
whatever that word is, for the whole fucking episode and another probably 2 hours, and never touch watches. And I can hear the audience going, all right, guys, I get it now. I get it. All right, shut the fuck up now.
Okay.
Give me the fucking watches. I know this how this podcast works, but I know. So we are going to talk about watches now. I noticed in your watch collection that you kindly showed us, a lot of your purchases have come very rapidly in this pandemic time. Yeah. So tell us what the fuck happened.
Fair enough. So I've always been a watch guy. I don't say that offhand, or rather on hand, on wrist. Gosh, what a terrible joke. I because we had always traveled. Or a dad joke, or just a lame joke straight up.
Right. Yeah. Pause. Everybody pause.
Because I traveled a lot, and we were moving a lot when I was really, really young. We just always had watches as far as like, okay, you and your sister meet up here in 15 minutes, or like, you're going to miss the van type stuff. And so always had my first watch ever was a Timex Iron Man, it's the American version of like a G-Shock. And
Mhm.
I loved it. It was great. And like, it was pretty cool too, because, you're 7 years old and you know how to use like a digital chronometer, start,
Yeah.
stop. And like, it had an Indiglo feature, and it did have complications. When I was in high school, and I won't deviate much from the watches, but just for a little more context, in high school, I did this cool semester abroad program that was very rigorous and outdoors on an island on the Bahamas. It sounds pretty cush. It was not. And it was run by an ex-Navy SEAL. And we woke up at 6 a.m. every day, had to run 2 miles. We harvested our own food. We literally there was no running water, no electricity. It was intense. It was really intense. But we scuba dived every day. It was kind of centered around marine biology. So at the age of 16, I had a proper dive watch. It was a company called Luminox. They made the Navy SEAL watch. But I really counted on it because you do night dives and stuff like that. And, you need a proper dive watch. So that was the first tool watch.
Yeah.
But the truth of it is when I got married, I think in college, I had a Tag Heuer, like a Aqua Racer. I think I had like a Tissot Blue Gentleman. I always had kind of my philosophy with like wines when I was a young man was like, have like the really nice looking bottle with like the cursive and the fonts that looks like really French and proper, but like costs $16. And like, that was kind of, and I could give it and tell a story and then kind of move. So that was kind of with watches initially.
That was more than me. Mine was like, does this get me pissed? Does this get me pissed for $16? That's what I was thinking. But sorry, yeah, continue.
And how did that translate to a watch? If that was, does this get me pissed? Was it just like?
No, it did translate to. I wasn't thinking about watches.
So my first real watch was when I got married. My wife, the day we got married, actually, like an hour before, we met each other at the church altar in the different hotel rooms. One of my groomsmen knocked on the door and said, "Hey, this is from Lucy," and it was a vintage Cartier tank with a personal engraving on the back, which was beautiful. And I wore it when we got married, and it turns out that's kind of half of the package because we had like I said, I had a large extended family. We had a really large wedding. I think if we had to do it again, we would probably do it differently, but it was really beautiful. It was about 450 people, and they flew in from all over. It was here in Los Angeles. And traditionally, and I come from a Southern family in Texas, and, you have a wedding registry, and different cultures do it different ways, but usually you set it up at a nice department store and, things like China and the things traditionally you would want in your house as a married couple. And so people were very, very generous. And about a month after, as we went to this department store in Beverly Hills, we just, I don't know, we're all young-ish, me less so than you, but we just don't need that many things, right? Like the idea of silver. I grew up when my parents set up a proper table for like many guests, like silver's a hard thing. You have to polish it. It's really heavy. You have to store it. Like it's ridiculous. And like heavy mahogany tables and buffed sideboards and like heavy china, like we just live in a different age. Not to mention, I mean, even nowadays, like I have to do everything I can to save my DVD collection. Like we don't need that. Like you don't need to own things. And so there were some nice gifts that people gave that we were like, wow, do we even have like storage for this? And the person at this shopping department was like, oh, well, you can just trade it in for credit if you want. And I was like, excuse me? And they said, yeah, are you interested in watches? And I was like,
say no more.
Wait a minute. Yeah, exactly. Say no more. And so we went, and they were the Rolex distributor, and they had I had my eye on this watch, which was the Explorer.
Yeah.
And it was always kind of exactly what I was looking for, but the perfect complement to a Cartier, right? Because it was kind of the handsome version of the tool watch. And I wasn't that into Rolex at the time, but I knew I didn't want something that screamed Rolex.
Mm-hmm.
And so those two watches were my ideal, 2-watch collection for 5 years, kind of every single day, mostly the Explorer and then the tank on special occasions. And
yeah.
then,
So from the 2 watches in the past 5 years, and then quickly to 2020, and you've had so many new acquisitions, right? I don't know, like we were talking about self-expression earlier and for the last half of the episode, but do you ever find that for the newer pieces that you acquired this year, was that also in a form of self-expression? Like, what made you acquire some particular pieces? Was it emotionally driven, or did you have specific reasons behind every purchase? I know from your episode in Hodinki, you had your eye on the 321, and then now when you sent the file over, I was like, oh, he got it. Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
no,
before
no,
he answers that, before
yeah,
you answer that, Miles, like for somebody who loves a story, yeah, I just knew you're going to be a sucker for the Moonwatch story. Like it has ever, you just get, for someone like you just cannot get away with that. As soon as you touch that story, you're dead. Yeah.
Well,
I've got one too, but
I have a personal connection to that exact
yeah, it was
story,
in, you said it in a dinky, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so a couple things to point out. One, half of these watches are not yet in my possession. In fact, the Rolex, here's something that is the truth. The Rolex is the only watch I saw and held before I purchased. Every single other watch there I have never held, nor have I ever seen in the metal. But I know what I like. And I'll just back up. When I was in college, when I was an undergrad, I worked at a men's clothing store. And as I had this colorful career as an actor and traveling around the world in my 20s, and also not having responsibilities and at certain times making a decent bit of money, I would always, I would spend that money with commissioning a jacket from a tailor. And my rule was always, they'd say, well, what would you like? And I'd say, just in the house style. Dress me as though I was your younger cousin. That was literally my words. And I don't know why. Actually, somebody just pointed out when we used to go to restaurants pre-COVID, but whenever I'd go to a nice restaurant, I would say to the waiter, "What are your two favorite things on the menu?" And he'd say the two favorite things, and I'd say, "I'll have one of them. Just don't tell me what it is." And I would wait for them to kind of put it down and eat whatever it was. I'm sure it was great, but I'm interested in the house specialty. And so I always had this rule in making musical playlists that you can't use the same band twice. So if it was a genre, if it was a moment, whatever the theme was of the playlist, it's kind of the perfect example from that band. Some, they could have 20 incredible songs. So as you look at this collection, by the way, everything accelerated at COVID because because the algorithms worked, man. Holy smokes. From watchfinder.co to then Tim Masso to then getting in deep. But initially, honestly, watches was a way for me to quiet my mind. It was truly a coping mechanism. I lost my, I think we all, let's be honest, this year has been just bizarro nutso. Like it changed the world. And for in America, you guys were a little ahead of us, but here, come April, I didn't know if my business was going to survive. Like I really didn't know anything. And it was a very nervous time. Also here in Los Angeles, we had, Black Lives Matter was getting very, very disruptive, very near my house. I heard gunshots, nobody knows what's going on. And I have two very young children. And so you're not getting any sleep. Things are kind of upside down. And late at night, I would start reading about movements and studying kind of philosophically time and watching these watch videos. And I just started being able to sleep. Like I actually was able to sleep. And I was like, well, that's weird. So then, then I started actually, I got this Louis Nardin, The Magic of Watches book, pretty nerdy stuff. And read it for 15 minutes and slept like a baby. And I was like, well, what does this mean? I'm serious. And so I kind of started getting into it. And so given everything I just said, the watch that comes next was, what does this offer that I don't already have? Because to be honest, between a tank and a reasonable Rolex, you're doing pretty great out of the gate.
Yeah, you're pretty covered.
Pretty solid watches, right?
Yeah,
so
covered, yeah.
I fell in love, and I knew a little bit about Grand Seiko, Japan has played a big role in my life, but like the spring drive, and honestly, whoever does those voices at Watchfinder, I mean, that guy straight up seduced me. And I watched this video on the SBGY003, and with the dimensions and everything and just the spring drive and whatnot, and I knew I was going to put it on a different strap. I was like, okay. And then I got the piece, and then I was like, oh, I'm in trouble. Because now I love it, and the anticipation and all of it. And so I was like, okay, well, let's be reasonable. What I now need is like a dive watch, but I don't need to get like a Blancpain or anything. You know, I'm still trying to be super reasonable. And so the Seiko is kind of like the 62 Moss re-release, the SLA 037. And it's perfect. Also, right. See, the other thing the Rolex did for me that really spoiled me was right in the sweet spot, you know, at 39 millimeters. And so to start out, like, to me, that just, it feels right. That weight feels right. So that is my North Star. And so it kind of kept me within these confines. And so I realize now, having just the Grand Seiko, the Rolex, and the Cartier, I then began to realize, okay, I actually kind of count on a steel bracelet for an everyday wear. Like sweating, you know, my wrist sweats. Like, I work in a roasting facility. I also need to be able to throw on a sports coat and be in front of smart, impressive people on a moment's notice. Like, so the Rolex still kind of delivered. But then I also started like getting really interested in history and also communicating with other people who are like you guys just had, you know, Adrian Barker on. Like, Adrian's story, one, is so cool with Bark and Jack, but I think is also representative of kind of this cool moment we're in. I mean, when you and I first spoke on the phone, you guys kind of were like, hey, this is really nice, but like, how on earth did you guys even hear of us? Like, what are we even doing talking? And it's just, I got really excited. It just got the creative juices going on the inside. And then it would turn out that over the course of those kind of 5 months after March, I had a bunch of one-off, like, big successes. Like, I made this Tom Cruise video that I put on the internet that got millions of views, but then what nobody knows is I sold it to Australia for like a national television campaign. And it was just this one-off weird thing where all of a sudden I have a bunch of money just sitting in a PayPal account. And I'm like, gosh, this watch thing really could be one of like the joy that I discovered this year that lasts me the next 60 years of my life. Like, let's really, so I admit I totally got carried away, but I will leave it to you, the real professionals, to tell me kind of how I'm doing in my journey so far.
I would say you're doing really well because you've actually thought about what you're buying. I think considering, like, it sounds like you got really deep into this rabbit hole this year. The watches you bought were really not what I expected, because you generally go through you generally go to see that if these algorithms are working, you also get to see the Nautiluses, the Daytonas, the Submariners, and there isn't one of those pieces in your collection. And so you obviously went past that, didn't need what those pieces which offer exclusivity, that whole feeling of, I got it.
Yeah.
You didn't need that. So you went further than that. You started reading books, which I think not many people do straight off the bat so quickly. Understanding the movement. So actually, I think you're doing really, really, really well. Yeah, I was like, but I mean,
well, I appreciate
everybody has a different collection, right? There isn't really like, oh, your collection is shit, my collection is better. It's how it best portrays you, right? How it connects with you, because you're the one that's going to wear them, right? So there isn't like a best watch or a shit watch. The best watch is the watch that you're wearing. It should be for you, right? So,
and we used to say, I do everything on a kind of a cost per use calculation. You know, with menswear, when I worked at a men's tailoring suit, we used to say the most expensive suit you ever buy is the one you never wear. So, you know, if you buy a really, really expensive suit, but you can wear it twice a week and it'll last you for 10 years, that's an incredible purchase. And of course, in the fashion industry right now, you're hearing a lot of buy better, buy less. For me, I also got it. Actually, do you know what? Though? Sometimes I thought maybe I might just pop into
do that.
Well, if you're going to do that, if you're going to do that, yeah, you should try and beat Adrian Barker, because if you're talking about cost per usage for suits, I think that guy's got a shit deal, because he's got a lot of suits. He's not wearing a lot of suits, right?
By the way, he does have an interesting accent. You talked about that. With English accents, you can do, I mean, quite a lot of my friends from university were very SW3, and so it was quite posh.
SW3,
outrageous. Sloane Rangers, all that nonsense.
Yeah, but they regularly down Harrods though.
But at the same time, I'll just do just about the next 2 minutes an Australian accent, if you don't mind. It's absolutely outrageous. But we'll just kind of kick into it, even though a lot of my friends would say this accent's actually a bit Kiwi. It's a little bit from New Zealand. But actually, the truth of it is, guys,
Can you do Swiss? Because it's a what?
I have to hear it a little bit. If I can hear it, I'll do it. But you guys. And we can go down the list, because it wasn't until that I got one, I got the next, and some of them, one of them I bought only because I joined this watch club.
Yeah.
But I only joined this watch club because I had to write an essay to get into the watch club, which for me pushed all the right buttons. But I will just say the very last piece, which I ordered, and it took a process to order. I really, no joke, and I'm not blowing smoke, you guys are kind of the reason that I took such an interest in that. I was not, my eyes, I just didn't think about the Royal Oak AP that much until, really listening, particularly to you, Lung Lung, and also, Austin Chu and a few others, and then really zooming back and thinking about it. But I wouldn't have approached it had it not been for the pieces beforehand.
What's really refreshing is you had the Cartier and Rolex, and then you went for a Grand Seiko, and then you've got a Seiko, and an SUF Helsinki. I thought, oh, that's great. He hasn't going up, or what I say, progressing in the watch journey doesn't necessarily mean you go up in price, right? You should actually, I think that a person that loves watches, a watch enthusiast, aficionado, all these terms, whatever you just call them, the more knowledgeable you are, really you should have an understanding of all the watches, not just specific. Obviously, I think you have your own flavor, own taste, which you think, do you know what? I really love vintage Patek, or I love vintage AP, or I love AP, and then you niche out. But you should have a broad understanding of all the other stuff that's out there as well. Right? It would be a very limiting conversation if you could only just talk about what, I don't know, Rolex or something like that.
Well, and I'm so driven by the relationship, by the longer narrative. And again, because I kind of came into thinking about other nice things, like for me, clothes, through my relationship with the tailor. I've always, with SUF Helsinki, for example, I was just like, well, this is the coolest. This is a great story in watches. This is so cool that this company is in Iceland, and just kind of like the Viking hair, and they're just doing it, and then I can send them a note on Instagram and they'll respond. That it's so, for me, I try to weave things in so much that, when people talk about, okay, well, what's your Grail watch? What's your, for me, there's no Grail. Maybe the Grail watch would be maybe a Royal Oak only after, Francois Henry Balmanis and I played golf together, after a week spending time getting to know each other. And he said, I want you to have this for your grandson. That could be a Grail watch to me, but it's all packaged in these moments and in these occasions and in this. So for example, the Omega, to me, which I just think I'm so excited about this piece. I mean, it really is exciting. And the conventional professional Speedmaster, it's a little too large. It's a little too clunky. I'm not that into it. But like I said, the most famous graduate from my high school was the third guy in the Apollo program who didn't get on the moon. It was Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and then him. He had to stay in it. And his name was Michael Collins. And there's a flag that flew on and I was just, what an incredible thing. And then for this movement to have happened. So that was my first big risk, because that was the very first watch where I like you, Jacqueline, I've never dealt with a AD. And by the way, I live, right down the street from Beverly Hills, where everybody's headquartered. It's a ghost town. Everybody's closed down. It's weird COVID time. So I had to call up this guy, and then, it was the first time where I kind of had to dance a little bit and be like,
Yeah.
hey, I don't want to show off for you, but you should know, like, I'm pretty into this stuff. So like, ask me a few trivia questions, and then do I just
What
pay
you
now,
really
or how does
said
this
was,
work?
what you really said was, I'm Mal Fisher. I've been
Yeah.
in Final Destination 5. Give me, and Mad Men and Gossip Girl. Give me the watch. That's what you really said.
Yeah, but it's Hollywood. So the person who I'm talking to at Omega
Yeah.
was like, well, let me tell you something. I'm working here at
I
Omega,
was- yeah.
and I was in Final Destination 4. So get in line, Mac.
But I don't think it's a huge risk of getting the Omega, mate. Like, it's a pretty much like, it's a great watch, great
Yeah.
looking watch. It's great on different types of straps.
Mm.
But I also know that you have a very strong affiliation with Moser, right? I was following your stories this week, and
But
you were blown
brand
away,
new.
right?
How cool was that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You should tell that story, you know? Yeah.
I gladly tell the story. So I have this podcast, and professionally, my obligation, I want to come on as a guest, as a fan of your show. But I should say again, I have a podcast. Please listen to it. It's called Coffee with the Greats. It's really great. The producer of that podcast is really friendly with the guys at Hodinkee. And he knew I was into watches, and I was talking to him, but he was like, hey, would you ever be interested in doing a podcast at Hodinkee? So that kind of started it. And then I wrote this little, they were gracious to feature me in the most recent printed version of Hodinkee. Only 2 pages, by the way, in the same section as a friend of the pod, Horror Loop, Austin Chu. But I wrote a little piece about like why I collect watches, and I was excited. I really, I really tried to be thoughtful about it and write a little essay. And then shortly after I submitted that, I saw this group called This Collective, which is out of San Francisco. It's 2 former Facebook guys who are the nicest guys. And it's a watch group, but it's the whole premise behind this watch group, which I think is really cool, is they will commission original pieces, but really special pieces through watch. So the very first one, it was high and low. One was a Zenith chronograph that was extraordinary. That really was a limited run, and every member has to buy the piece. Now, you can sell the piece afterwards. You can do what you'll like with it. But as a standing member of the club, I think initially there were just 50. Now there's 75. You had to buy the piece. And you get a chance to skip every other year. But this extraordinary Moser Center Seconds Pioneer came out, but it was a little different. It had a multi-directional rotating bezel. It's quite a proper tool watch. But I've been into Moser for a long time and was looking for an excuse. And all of a sudden I saw this, hey, open to submissions, but you have to kind of, they're secretive. You have to write an essay. And I was like, well, man, if I could just copy paste half of this Hodinkee article, like this could be. But I also wrote other things about what I like. And then, you're interviewed over the phone. And it was really cool. But I was like, well, this Moser piece, I'm really excited about this. And the fact that the whole community, everybody else is in, is great. And so in the private chat group, you talk about it. So I also love watch books. And there's nothing on Moser. I found something on the Kindle for like $2, which must have been an auto translate from Russian, because like half of the American, like English words were made up. It was just gobbledygook.
You must have felt right at home at Hollywood then.
Yeah, right at home. Right at home. And so I, just trying to be friendly. I've long admired Moser CEO. He's a young, dynamic guy, Edouard Mélin. And, he's kind of been very forward on engaging with YouTube personalities and with podcasts. And he's put a very clever spin on it, which I think is original, about how it really is an entrepreneurial haute lingerie brand at heart. And when you think about Moser and you realize, wow, the founder really put Schaffhausen on the map. Of course, IWC was kind of it was founded by an American, but anyways, there's no books on Moser. So I just wrote him a note. He had recommended a business school book on a very obscure podcast, and I was a fan of his. And so I found the book and I read it. And then I just sent him a little DM on Insta saying, hey, thanks for the book recommendation. I appreciate it. And he wrote me back as a small chat, and just as one does over Instagram, pleasantries. And I think I said, like, by the way, I wish I could find a book on Moser. There's nothing. 3 days later, I don't know how he gets my address. a FedEx arrives, and it's 3 different books on Moser. Of course, 2 are in not French, but German, because it's switched Deutsch. So I'll need a translator, but rare books, like real books on the I mean, talk about gaining a customer for life. Like, first off, I'm a fan of his forever. 2, I couldn't be more excited to tell people about Moser. 3, like, you know, I'm not sure I even know the CEO of Omega's name. And I certainly know if I was interested, like, he wouldn't want to talk to me or like engage, like, and that's fine. That's no comment on him. But boy, that's a really, really cool thing, particularly for a guy like me that is just interested in relationships. As far as like conversation, like the other thing I love about watches, I view you guys as, you talk to kind of the most sophisticated set. You talk to proper collectors. That's your interest. But I think all of us appreciate that, like, there's really nothing about wealth when it comes to the wonder of watches. Like, it's so cool that you can really kind of be a geek and nerd out about it. And yeah, I like that. So that just recently happened. So now I'm gonna brush up on, and Moser, for example, just the history, like, totally fascinating as I understand it. You know, this Moser guy was like apparently pretty crafty with like fixing clocks because it was in his family, but like he was a really good looking guy who kind of liked to drink and like partied. Like, I think he partied hard and for real. And he just found his way into Russia, and like Tsar Alexander Nicholas I was like, hey, somebody fix my favorite clock or like people are going to die. And this like good looking kind of heartthrob guy was like, yo, I can fix the clock. Fixes it. And then it's like, you're my man, whatever you need, I'm going to bankroll you. And like that started Schaffhausen. Like, I just love these stories.
All right, let's finish off this podcast with
Long, what are you thinking? You're looking at and shaking your head and being like, what is going on?
I'm thinking, if any other brand is listening to this, they are going to be sending you books because they're like, this is a cheap customer. Send 2 books or 3 books and sold, you know?
Yeah, let's
I'll take it.
Finish off with the question you asked us, which was, if you could actually take charge of a brand for 2 years, which brand would you do? And I remember we answered it, but I can't remember if you answered it. And I think it also, I was listening to your Hodinkee podcast, and you were saying that, you know, you've been to Rodeo Drive and all the dealers there, and you just haven't been to such a, even like, it's been so soulless for you there. Like, you think, hang on, this is so behind, you know. So which brand would you take like charge of for 2 years? What would you do? And how would you actually improve the whole communication aspect of a lot of these brands right now?
I wasn't anticipating that question, so give me a quick moment. I'm inclined to give, if you'll allow me to think out loud, I'll think out loud, and then you can kind of source my. So initially, I'm inclined to say something like, you know, keep it native. So there's a lot of kind of fun emerging American brands, but they're very, very few. Whereas, you know, Westbury from Connecticut, it was Waltham in Massachusetts, it was Elgin in Illinois, and it was Westbury, which became Timex in Connecticut. And Timex is still pretty cool. And there's, you know, fashion designers who are doing one-off. But if I'm being perfectly honest, I think there's a lot of brands that could use a lot of improvement. Breguet just confounds me. I don't understand it because they have such extraordinary heritage, and, you know, even their numerals extend beyond watch design language. They're well known around the world. Not to mention Breguet himself is, I think, inarguably the most famous watchmaker who ever lived. So that one is weird. But my answer actually, I think, would be Vacheron, because what an opportunity. I mean, when you really think of Vacheron, like when I think of Vacheron, like I go back to be perfectly honest, like the Protestant Reformation, like why is Geneva the cradle? And it just goes so far back with Vacheron in a way that they're so extraordinary. And, you know, they've been so outshined by the 2 other in the trilogy. And then you have, you know, A. Langesson, who deserves to be in the trilogy, and a couple of others that are chasing up. And so with Vacheron, it's like, hey, it's going to be hard to inspire the next generation of emerging consumers. But if you had 2 years kind of unlimited budget and they could put up with some like American running the place, I think you get the most opportunity to say, we did it first. It's not that we did it better, but we will continue to do it longer. And with your help, here's why. And I really am drawn to heritage, and I think craftsmanship can be played up in a really, really cool way. Like I think to young people today, it's like, hey, 1800s were pretty cool. You know what's cooler in the 1800s? 1700s. Like tell those stories. Like I think you can't buy history. You just can't. Jean-Claude Biver tried to do it with Blancpain. He did an incredible job, but it's like, hey, 1735, and then kind of defunct in 1747, and then 1980. Like Vacheron's the real deal. But is it? Like AP gets so much more credit, and they're much more dynamic with like AP houses being built and totally reinventing, and I guess it's because, look, Vacheron Constantin had some pretty loose management, a couple of like Qatari sheiks, and it just kind of fell into disrepair. And even when you look at their promotional materials, it's like, guys, come on, who's doing this for you guys? Like, what are we even talking about here?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I had a message on Instagram this week about it. Like some guy was asking me, what do you think of Vacheron? Which is like such the most broad-ended question ever. And I was like, what do you mean? Yeah. And I said, well, there's not really a product offering that really resonates with me. The brand doesn't really resonate with me. They're sports models, which is a very good way of getting new customers into that brand. They're not competitive against the Royal Oak or the Nautilus. You could say the 222 is probably the nicest piece, but it's still not quite there.
Right.
And if you talk about like, okay, maybe the Corne de Vache, which is the Chronos, I would prefer to go Lang & Söhne. So I can't really find a product offer. I want to like them. Like them, right? But the product offering's not there, and the branding doesn't communicate with me at all. So
I feel the same. I want to like them. If I got a piece right now, again, how it fits into my collection would probably be the 1921, the American, the driver's watch, because it's it's a cushion case. It is, and also even those numerals, those precede Art Deco. I mean, that's really Art Nouveau. That's 1920. Kind of the very early 1900s. And so I just think there's a lot of opportunity in Vacheron that really is not being captured at all, and might not. I mean, I think the super, super high end, it's weird when you study brands, right? Because I'll hear people talk about the watch market. It's like, well, of course, in this time, if you're Rolex or, Patek, you're doing fine. But like for the smaller ones, like there's some interesting, and I think, gosh, isn't that all things? Like if you hear a bunch of bankers, it's like, well, what's going on? Well, I mean, if you're JP Morgan or like you're, Goldman, like you're doing fine. Citigroup maybe, but like, boy, Warburg Pincus or like, it's like, what are we talking about? It's such a large world. And yet with watches, you have these old brands that really all it takes is like a few years. And then it's like, yeah, hey, most people, I'm only going to buy one, and like you're 8th on the list. So again, props to a brand like Moser. I think props to a brand like AP that continues to be really, really forward thinking in their communication and marketing.
Well, I'll tell you something about AP, Miles. You're talking about if Vacheron let an American take charge. There is an American in AP that is very in a very high position with Francois. It's Michael Friedman. So, right, he's
the head of complications.
Yeah, he's head of complications, but he's head of, like, he does a lot. Like, I don't think it's just limited to that. But he really loved watches. He went over to Switzerland, learned French, everything. Really, so it's funny that you mentioned that AP and there is an American in there.
Yep.
I think that's a nice way to kind of finish the podcast. But is there a quick fire, Jacqueline?
I wanted to do something different with Miles.
Oh, okay, nice.
Do something with accents.
No.
Make him answer everything in different accents.
No, because I feel like he's such an inspiring person, right? Your life again has been very colorful, I'm sure to the younger audiences that are listening to this, they have a lot of questions about what motivates you and just your journey, like from being a singer to being in Hollywood and then doing your own business and now starting a coffee brand and doing this amazing podcast. I really just wanted to end off today with a question to you, Miles. What is it that keeps you up at night? If you could tell us.
An overactive mind that has a hard time being in the moment. I really do. I think so much of my young life was lived in the future tense. The word should dictated a lot of behavior. And I've never been kind of competitive externally, but I'm insanely competitive with what I think is the best version of myself. And, you know, it's hard. It's tough. And for things to be good enough is a muscle that needs to be constantly like active. I think it fatigues after a while. So, you know, I try to tell myself these days, to be honest, what if everything was exactly where it needs to be? And I really try to think about that and then accept the answer. And it's really, really hard. And that's taken me a long time to do. But I think for a good part of my life, particularly towards the end of, you know, when I was really trying to achieve an acting career in my late 20s, if I'm being honest, I was really short on a bit of gratitude and a bit of humility. You know, I just expected so much of myself and was so like, yeah, but I don't, you know, deep down, it's like, okay, yeah, but you don't understand. You don't understand all the context of my life. Like, you don't understand this, or this is how I'm different, or this is, and I secretly in my own head kind of bracketed my experience from the rest of the world. And the more life that I lived and the more experience I had, I realized, you know, my pain, my doubts are no different from other people's in how much I feel them. You know, we all feel unique and we all sometimes feel lonely and confused and resentful and all of that. And I think the more comfortable I was just in my own skin by not being like, I mean, you know, again, as an actor for so long, it's like you meet someone, they say, well, what do you do? Well, I'm an actor. And then immediately it's like, well, what have you done? You know, whereas like, Daniel, you were saying, you know, a very respectful career as a doctor. It's like, well, what do you do? Well, I'm a doctor. Oh, well, what surgeries have you performed? Do I know any of your surgeries? Like, you don't ask that. You don't have to constantly qualify to people like, yes, I've done this. And here are my medals. So I hated that. And I hated, you know, being like, well, you haven't seen me in anything, but like, I'm also a really clever guy who's very talented. Like it just was tough for a long time. So, I've tried to not should all over myself, if that makes sense. And again, it's hard, you know, talk is cheap, but I think all of us are overachievers and all of us are highly calibrated. You know, we're all adjusted in 6 different places, but like, okay, well, we are. So it's, so we're in a bad, like if we mess up, that's on me. I was given every advantage in the world. I was born with every advantage. So like, including like, hey, I'm a conventionally good looking person and I can speak in a lot of languages and I'm fluent and I have every opportunity available to me. And so it's like, I had a lot of shame for not achieving. And I don't think it was really healthy for a long time. Does that answer any of your question?
Yeah, it resonates.
That's an amazing answer.
Yeah.
Mine is you're conventionally good looking.
I was gonna say that too.
It's one of the only reasons I went into acting though, because people are like, you should act. And I was like, and they'd say, you look like Tom Cruise. And I was
don't
like,
make it worse for you. Don't make it worse for yourself.
I'm sorry.
I have to say though,
I deserve it.
I read this comment online saying that, he's so dreamy. He looks exactly like the type of child that if Christian Bale and Tom Cruise had to son. And I'm like, you're so right.
The thing
Well,
is,
I'm bright
I
red.
didn't see.
I'm just glad to be the butt of the jokes this time and not have the sexual innuendos flying.
I didn't see the Tom Cruise lookalike thing until like he actually said, and then I went on to YouTube, and then I was like, oh yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Especially if you put the
it's
aviators on
crazy.
and stuff. It's the smile. It's the smile. It's everything. It's like, oh my god, he does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you can, I know it's a podcast, so they don't see it, but I can do like a little impression for you guys right now over Zoom.
All right.
Please.
Very welcomed.
With
Yeah.
Tom Cruise, it's all here. Just give me a regular long. Give me like any sentence. It can be about anything, but tell me like what you did, quickly before getting on the Zoom.
I went for a run on the treadmill for an hour.
Okay, so it would be
All right,
like,
yeah.
I went on a run just for about an hour on Zoom.
Oh my god.
So that's
So
part of
good.
it.
Can you do so I watched Emily Blunt's impersonation of Tom Cruise where she said I'm in need for speed. Can you do that in Tom Cruise?
Well, it's anything. When I do any sort of impression with anything, in any sort of impression, you do a heightened version of someone. You find these kind of things and you try to bring them out. And so I always try to find two words. And for Tom Cruise, for me, it was like intense pleading. It's like no always, but there's a pleading in his eyes. Like, you have to come help me. So you really can say anything. For those who can't see, the girls are losing it right now.
It's so good.
And it's,
Okay, wait.
it's kind of that. And then just,
Can you do another one where you're at McDonald's and you're like, please upsize this for me? Can I get an upsize?
yeah, sure. Hold on, I gotta hey, sorry. This was supposed to be a little larger now. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of.
I can't even talk right now.
Yeah.
There you
You
go.
know what,
And
it's
so,
such a shame. Such a shame
Yeah.
that nobody can see that. It is
Yeah.
fucking gold. Like,
Oh my
it
God.
is
Oh my
exactly how Tom, especially the bit where he laughs. He does that.
Yeah, Tom Cruise laugh.
Yeah, his
Well,
laugh.
Well,
And it's
for-
weird too, because like the way, even just the way I talk, like it's been at every stage in my life. And also it's not just, oh, you impersonate this person. It's you happen to impersonate this person who also was the single most famous global actor for 20 years. Like this one person kind of represents like big American movies.
Yeah, he
And
does,
so
yeah.
it's just always been this thing, and I think it'll never go away. And eventually I just learned it just makes people happy. Like, just do it. But that had, for a while, it was a big chip on my own shoulder, even though I have nothing but love for Tom Cruise. I've never met him. He has no idea who I am. But, I didn't ever want to do anything disrespectful, but I also was like, hey, I'm more than that. And so tried to like do these other kind of things. But I'm glad you guys like it. Hey, anytime if you're bored, just give me a call and I'll figure you out.
for those people,
Oh my God.
for those
Yeah.
people who weren't as lucky as we are and didn't
Yeah.
see Miles, go to his YouTube channel and watch his
So
campaign.
good.
So good. Oh, it's dead on. Oh my God.
So let me just, as a fan, let me just ask a question to you guys. What's 2021 looking like for the Waiting List podcast? Clearly we have a new face and a new voice at the microphone, but anything you guys can kind of share as far as where you want to take and grow this?
Mm.
Yeah, we want to basically grow the audience to a more solid and hit our targets on where we want to have our audience. Also learn from our audience exactly what they want. Like I think we mentioned the last time with our chat with you that going down the advertising route isn't really something that attracts me.
Mm.
I want to offer them value. So we're going to actually very soon be changing our Instagram account to a more
Cool.
educational and motivational kind of platform. Then we'll be launching our website soon. So this year was really about, hang on, we were in COVID, and I'm sure you heard the story about all of us being in like the lobby of the Mandarin or something, Four Seasons.
Yeah.
And we were talking about watches, and we were only four of us because of the social distancing was only, we were limited to four people. We're talking about watches, and that was the only thing we could do. And we were thinking, okay, would anybody actually like to listen to this? Right. And it was like, okay, well, so we'll see if anybody does like listen to it. So we'll put it on there. And it quickly became apparent that actually, yeah, people were getting some value out of this. Right. And then it was like, okay, since they're do we have the capacity to actually even execute this in the long term? What's within our resource, time, money, mainly time, of actually being able to do this consistently? So can we even from an executive point of view do it? And that was that took quite a significant amount of time. And now it's like, okay, once we have the website and the Instagram and the podcast is still going on, how do we then like grow the platform to more people? How do we reach those people that actually enjoy listening to it more? So that's where we'll be focusing probably 2021 on.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Well,
Well,
do you have any like?
But it's been amazing though. It's been amazing that people like yourself have reached out. Like when we first started, I think I speak for everybody here. Like I didn't think I'd be having you on the podcast waiting list. Like, and I didn't think that I would have a lot of the people that we've had on, right? And certainly there's another person, which I won't say who it is, that I've got scheduled down
awesome.
past the first quarter, right? That I would never have thought he would come on, right? But like it's just amazing, But it's like it goes.
You guys are doing it. You're doing it.
Yeah, all the people that are listening to this, or especially the young people, because I know a lot of young people listen to this. Yeah, I never knew what this might be, right? I'm kind of shooting from the hip. Even now, I'm shooting from the hip, right? But where we got to was far exceeded my expectation of where I thought it could go to, right? And it just goes to say, if you have an idea, if you want to do it, start it, do it. Don't think about so much, just try it, right? And then things will fall into place. I think you mentioned something in our last chat. It's something that I've also listened to that really sticks in my mind, is where Steve Jobs is talking to college grads.
Stanford.
Yeah,
Yep.
Stanford. And he says, when you look back in the mirror, it suddenly, through hindsight, you can see how the dots joined up together. But when you're actually going through it, it just seems like, what the hell's going on? But life just suddenly tells you it was all supposed to go like that. And it all seems to make sense now. And I think, that's very powerful, to give those people that lack a little bit of motivation, drive, to actually go and do it. Yeah.
And part of what executing on your advice means is being vulnerable. Like, this is not the perfect Photoshopped photo. Like your early episodes of this podcast were kind of thinking out loud, and like, that's okay, because that was just, you couldn't have done the fifth podcast without the fourth one. And you just need to get it going. And I find that people are really receptive to it. Listen, I'll say it one more time. You have given me 24 hours of beautiful content for free. Like, I'm so grateful to you. And on top of that, there's no ads. And I feel like I've gotten to, I know we'll, continue our conversations and relationships. And one, testament to the watch community. Two, super cool with this new paradigm of technology with podcasts. And three, like, it doesn't get kind of more genuine community building than that. Like, it would be pretty hard to be cynical about what you guys are doing. You're educating, you're informing. And I think that's really cool. And then the last thing I'll say is, I don't know that many podcasts that like have a really good thing going where guys and girls are the hosts together on like a casual level. It's just, you guys have really hit kind of like this nice, cool thing. And sometimes different hosts rotate in, but I'm a big fan. Thank you for having me. And it goes without saying, if any of you or all of you are in Los Angeles, I'm so psyched to hang out. And likewise, if I'm in your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm staying at your home.
Yeah, me too.
Great.
We'll just stay at the
Get
garage.
over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that garage looks like it's livable. So I think I could do
It'll
that.
be in better shape. We'll have it all lined up for you when you're here.
It was a real
But,
privilege to have you on the
thanks
podcast,
again,
Miles.
guys.
It
Thank
was
you
really,
so
really
much.
great. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you, Miles. Thank you.
Pleasure was mine, guys. I can't wait for all to come.
Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List podcast. Hit the subscribe button, and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram at the Waiting List Podcast.